Thank you, Noah. Well
If you
done.
know, you know.
Good recovery. And also, thank you for bringing up a topic that's very controversial and important in our society. You talked about that the solution isn't more gun control, but that it's having more effective plans. Have you put some thought into what those plans could be?
Yeah, so I believe if we take a look at the current system, right, in obtaining a firearm, I believe that we're on the right track, but there are definitely some changes that I believe should be made. For example, a psych evaluation, right? A lot of the times you see these mass shootings and these school shootings, and you look at them and you look at the person who committed these, and you're like, something is just not right. You know what I mean? And I feel like if we could hopefully see a more intense psychic evaluation, that we take leaps and bounds forward. And hopefully we'll see a significant decrease in these terrible occurrences.
So you're saying better psych evaluations before granting a permit?
Yeah. Not only granting a permit, but of course buying a weapon, right? Because you look at criminals who commit these mass shootings, they're not like, I need to get a permit before I can do this, right? If we could see that both, that would be amazing. The more security, the better, I believe.
Did your research give details about the people who did the mass shootings, if they had permits to have the guns, how they purchased the guns?
I did not look at the side about if they have permits, but I know that as of 2018, 74% of the mass shootings that did occur, the weapons used were legally obtained.
And who would be the criminals that are buying them on the black market? Or you think that would rise if we had tighter gun control? I'm
sorry, can you repeat that?
Do you have cases of people who bought their guns on the black market already, or are you arguing that that would increase, that they would buy them on the black market if we had tighter gun control?
It would definitely increase on the black market, because the idea of the black market is that it's accessible, and I mean, I've never had any experiences with the black market, but it's cheaper, right? And it's more accessible. There's no hoops that you need to jump through. There's no restrictions or regulations that you need to follow in order to get a gun. When, in some places you can walk down to the street corner and buy a gun for $300. Instead of going to the store and spending $600 and then waiting the 2 weeks and then registering it and then waiting another week, and it's just, yeah.
I have one more question, then I'll pass it on to the other judges. For picking this as your thesis subject, what was your motivation or personal interest?
Yeah, so I was raised around guns, hunting 2 times a year, this and that. But what really sparked it was the Sandy Hook shooting, right? I remember walking out of my room and seeing that headlining news and saying that shouldn't be happening today. It's sad that to a point, to a degree, that students worry about that. Kids in some places who take it more heavily than others can't focus on their education because they're constantly thinking about what happened last night. You turn on the news every day and it's a new shooting. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you. Mr. McCroskey?
So the claim against regulation is that it's not, part of your quote was that there's no way to stop
prevent its use entirely.
To prevent guns from being accessible, because you always have the black market. would you say that it would be worth it if it was able to deter a certain percentage of the crime? Would you say that it would be worth increasing legislation to prevent guns from being accessible to people? So maybe not 100% elimination, but at least a potential reduction.
In the amount of guns that they sell, or
the violence committed with guns. So if you increase the legislation against guns being accessible, that prevention would not eliminate all guns, but it would eliminate a certain percentage of guns. Would you see that as being a potential solution?
I think that the current legislation, the process that's in place now, again, minus the psych evaluation that I'd like to see, I think that we're on the right track. The issue is monitoring and evaluating the people that come through, and not necessarily the guns, because there's always going to be guns. Yeah.
Okay. Also, did you look up any statistics about the likelihood of a confrontation escalating with the presence of firearms?
Yeah, so it's interesting you say that. In my interview, one of my interviews with Mr. Oki, we were talking that as a person who carries your firearm, it's not a means of one-upping the other person, right? If that is your motivation, then you're the wrong person to be carrying a gun. That all comes down to the responsibility of the person who's carrying the gun on both ends, having the ability to have that self-control, to not draw your weapon if it's not necessarily. If they escalate, if the situation it doesn't call for that, then it truly comes down to the responsibility and the attitude. In my interview with Mr. Oki, he talked to me that we were discussing that police worry about citizens owning guns and whether or not they're properly trained, right? And under that umbrella of properly trained, of course you have skill, but attitudinal and your responsibility is trained, and that's what's most important.
And finally, what is the likelihood if concealed weapons permits are made more accessible? What do you think the likelihood would be of criminals increasing their carrying of weapons? Do you think that there would be an increase of criminals carrying guns in response to potentially citizens now having guns?
Yes, but regardless, criminals will carry their guns, right? The idea behind concealed carry is you don't know if they're carrying a gun, compared to open carry, right? Like Texas. You look around and you see, okay, that person is carrying a gun, that person's carrying a gun, that person's carrying a gun. In concealed carry, let's take everyone in this room, for example. I don't know if you're carrying a gun because it's concealed. You don't know if I'm carrying a gun if it's concealed. And it goes the same all around the room. So when you walk into a room and let's say someone desires to do harm and they want to commit another mass shooting, they're going to walk in and they're not going to know if people in here have a gun. And realistically, are they really going to take that chance? Because they know that if there is at least one person, which most likely is, they're going to take some lead back.
Okay. That's my final question.
Pastor Darrell?
I think you spoke to this a little bit, but in areas that have the tightest restriction on gun carry or concealed, I've heard that they have, those areas, for instance, Chicago, has the highest or a higher rate of gun violence. Did you come across, is that what you came across? And
I don't believe so. But to address that, I think that boils down to the city's history and kind of culture. And when you start something, it's especially that to a degree with such a great amount of people, it's very hard to put out that fire, right? I got a lot of questions when I was presenting to classes. Well, what about Australia, who had a complete gun buyback? Well, that's great for them, but in America, guns has been a part of our culture for decades now, and to completely strip that out of culture, it's like taking the beach away from Hawaii. You know what I mean?
Sure. The other, it was the Stanford professor who came out with statistics that you found to not be true as you researched other, how do we, as the public, how did you sort out, okay, who's telling the truth here?
Yeah, so that's interesting. So he came out with this article in December of 2018 or 17, and I was reading it, and from my previous knowledge, I was like, oh, that doesn't seem right. And sure enough, 2 months later, I can't remember who, but came out with a report addressing his book that he published, and it turned out that he lied about the numbers, and he fudged the numbers a lot of it, changed some states around, and really put down how it actually is. And thousands of people, millions of people, a whole bunch of universities. I mean, Stanford's Ivy League. You know what I mean? So when they come out with something, it must be true. And a whole bunch of universities were taking it and publishing it, and like, oh, this guy John J. Donahue, he's amazing. And then it turns out that he lied about it all. But yeah, it first came out when I was looking at it, and from my previous knowledge, I knew that something wasn't right about that.
Thank you.
Noah, well done. Really, really well done. You said that when you interviewed Mr. Oki, he was concerned that people weren't properly trained to use their weapons. In your opinion, would it be prudent to implement a mandatory training if you want to carry a weapon?
Yeah, so when you apply for a concealed carry permit, you're already obligated to take a course. And it's good to a degree as a bare minimum basic stuff. I'd like to see more intense training, especially because you're giving the freedom and the ability for people who who are never raised around guns. You're giving them the ability to now carry one with them wherever they go. You know, you look at police officers, right? Not all police officers were raised in families where guns were prominent. And they come into the academy and they come out and they go through this intensive training, and miraculous. You know, it's a complete transformation. The training that they have to go through is rigorous, and I feel ideally if everyone could go through that, that'd be amazing, because guns they're nothing to play around with, right? They can take a life. And it's important to instill that in people as early as you can. You know, parents, instilling gun safety in your children at a very young age is very important. But it's never too late.
So growing up in a household where my dad carried a weapon every day, he would go in for annual training. And because, you know, as he would say to us, he'd lose the finesse a little bit if he didn't get out there and practice. So would you say that, for me, for example, I want to carry. Would you say every year I should be going in and getting re-certified, so to speak?
Well, so for a permit, you take the class and you take the training, and whenever your permit expires, you pay a fee to renew that permit. Ideally, you'd have to take a new test every time you renew it, right? When you get your driver's license renewed, you don't take another driver's test, and it's the same thing with carrying a weapon and shooting, and that boils back down to the responsibility of the person who is carrying the firearm, taking the initiative to properly train and prepare in case the need arises where you might need to use your firearm. I think, I plan to carry when I'm able to legally, of course. And I plan on practicing a significant amount because, you train all these hours and hours and hours, and you might not ever have to use it. But what if that chance does come around and you're not trained and you're not prepared? Then what are you going to do?
Right.
You're going to look back and you say, oh, instead of going to the beach, I should have went and, plinked around for a couple hours. I wouldn't be, there's no detriment to it. You're practicing, you're getting better.
Oh, I'd definitely like to see that mandatory training in there. I recently took an HPD active shooter training class just so that I could understand a little bit more about what to do in a situation. Do you believe that everyone should take a class like that and be prepared? Because you mentioned 21 feet.
Yeah.
Most instances occur and the perpetrator's about 21 feet away.
Well, that statistic wasn't necessarily geared strictly towards mass shootings. That was just in general. People who do end up using their firearm, whether it be in you're pumping gas and a group of guys come up and try to rob you. But yeah, I think that would be. What exactly did you learn at that class? Because active shooter, I'm thinking of like schools.
Right, and they taught us how to prepare and deny access to the perpetrator, how to move in strategically
Yeah, that would
plan,
be.
and it really did equip me personally, but I wondered if you thought that everybody should be taking something like that, even somebody that's even given a gun permit.
Yeah.
Should they be forced to take that class that HPD puts on?
Definitely, and especially because it's coming from such a credible source. Police, right?
Right.
Especially coming from sports, I believe that through training, when you do something, why not do it to the best you can, and again, I'm sure if you are thrown into that situation and you're not prepared, you probably, I'd be banking that you wish you'd taken that course. Yeah.
Good. Thank you. Okay, we have 3 main categories from the audience. One would be on open carry versus concealed carry. Are you arguing for concealed carry? Do you have
Yes.
a preference of one
Concealed.
over the other, and why? Why not open carry?
Well, like I was saying to Mr. Murkowski, open carry it's visible, right? Concealed carry is you don't know. There's that mystical factor. If a criminal comes in and he desires to do something terrible, and he looks around and we're in an open carry state, and he looks around and no one has a gun on them, and he's like, I'm good. You know what I mean? And if it's concealed carry, he looks around and he doesn't see a gun because he's not supposed to see a gun. He doesn't know, and hopefully praying that's the detergent. Yeah.
Okay, the second category would be what would be the laws that would protect people if they needed to use their gun? People
sorry?
now can be have to defend themselves if they shoot someone who's come into their home.
Yeah, so
wouldn't that be even harder to do in a public situation?
I'm not quite sure on the details about home stuff. I was strictly looking at statistics about encounters, but I can definitely find that for you.
Well, in a public situation, what laws could be put in place to protect the people who may have to use their gun?
Yeah, so I don't think that there necessarily needs to be any new laws instilled. 21st century technology is amazing, you know. Security cameras, for example, and I know that this has been the case a lot recently, is what actually happens is captured on film. And there's no determining if one person is lying or the other person is lying. What happened is on film, and it's up to the judge's best discretion to determine what will happen. Yeah.
Okay, and we're out of time. So thank you very much, Noah.